Good day, people of God. We thank God for His mercies through this season. Welcome again to another 5-minute Sunday school lesson. Today, we move on to the second part of Lesson 8. The topic says the errors of Abimelech and Samson. Our memory verse as taken last week was from Galatians chapter 6 and verse 7. Don't be deceived, God is not mocked. Whatever a man sows, that he will reap. Today we will be emphasizing on the life of Samson. We will learn from Samson's experience that God commissions the man that he calls, and every leader must stand by his commission. The division we are considering today says Samson, the careless judge. And under this we shall be looking at the two subtitles, his powerful commissioning and his mistakes in leadership. Samson's story is found in Judges chapter 13 through 16. His powerful commissioning. Samson seems to be the most popular figure of the book of Judges. God planned his birth and decided what he would do with him right from then. Manoah, a Danite, and his wife had been barren during a period when the Israelites were being punished in the hands of the Philistines. God visited the house of Manoah with answers to their prayer. They were going to have a special child who would become Israel's deliverer. God has the big picture, but we only have the parts. His plan to deliver Israel included an answer to the prayer of a barren family. Because of the child's peculiarity, his mother was instructed by God not to take any strong drink and that the child should never get a haircut. The Bible calls us a peculiar people with a mission according to 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9. We have specific instructions from God to enable us to fulfill our mission. Samson's parents kept to the instructions, and Samson was later born. God fulfills his promise to the couple, and God blessed Samson as he grew, building him up to become Israel's deliverer. God calls us and continues to bless us with the resources to fulfill his mandate. God's Spirit stirred up Samson. You may not have a prophet praying over you to commission you or give you instructions regarding what God has planned for you. God stirs up your spirit to use the gifts that he has placed in you. You don't need to be given a collar around your neck or a position in the church before you can begin to fulfill God's ministry. Soon, Samson was encroaching into the enemy territory. He came home and told his parents that he wanted to get married to a Philistine lady that he had met. His parents did not know that Samson's actions at that time were actually inspired by God. Men may not know that certain situations are God-driven, but in accordance with God's will, let your godly desires lead you always. Through Samson's actions, God was simply setting up the Philistines for destruction, but no one could discern this. So looking at Samson's mistakes in leadership, that's the second part. The rest of Samson's story is told between Judges chapter 14 and 16. So in chapters 14 and 15, his marriage to the Philistine lady was disrupted right from the wedding. Samson was provoked and the anger was used to deal with the Philistines. He single-handedly killed a number of them, over 1,030. He also set fire over their vast farmlands. The way in which he achieved all of these feats was superhuman. God was behind it. As the strong man of Israel, Samson judged his people for 20 years. Now Samson's strength may have led him into pride, as he seemed to have done as he wished and no one could handle him. At the beginning of chapter 16, he visited a harlot where he was almost caught, but God's anointing on him came into play. It is possible for one to derail with God's anointing and not discern that an error has set in. Many fell out of God's favor because their anointing became more important to them than their God. Even when they are able to operate in these gifts, they are already being cut away from their source. Samson's fall began to come close when again he fell in love with another Philistine woman, Delilah. Delilah became the bait with which the Philistines got at Samson. God rescued him again and again, but Samson kept visiting the trap. Finally, he got caught in the Philistine snare and his hair was shaven. Well, it does not mean that Samson's source of power was his hair. God's Spirit was his source. But God's instruction was never to have the hair cut. Now, the hair was not what was important, but his obedience to God. Samson had to face the consequences after enjoying God's mercy over and over. After some time of suffering and Philistine imprisonment, Samson repented and prayed again to his source. God's mercy prevailed and Samson's strength was restored. Although he died, he killed more Philistines at his death than when he was alive. God's mercy is always available when we acknowledge Him as our source and not depend on our giftings. Our lessons learned. 1. God endows us with His Spirit to profit His kingdom and not for our selfish gains. Secondly, deliberate abuse of God's anointing invites His justice. That may be difficult to recover well from. We've come again to the end of Lesson 8. Join us again next week as we look at another lesson entirely. We'll be looking at Unit 3 by then. Till then, God bless you.